Hey everyone, my name is Mason Lehman. I use he, they pronouns, and today I'm going to be talking about everyone's favorite subject, public bathrooms. Specifically, I'm sharing my findings from conducting video tours in 18 single-stall, all-gender bathrooms on UCLA's campus. I will be discussing themes of violence, death, murder, and gender dysphoria. I am a trans and non-binary student at UCLA and feel privileged to access all-gender bathrooms. This is a luxury that is not afforded to everyone and is actively being banned in many states. One victim of this anti-transgender legislation was Next Benedict, they, them, a non-binary, two-spirited student in Oklahoma who was fatally beaten to death in their high school's bathroom by 3 fellow students. This is a failure of Nex's school and community, but also represents a wider national attack on queer and trans people. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of hate. As scholars, we have an imperative to be educated on these issues and share factual information. So let me provide you with some. There are over 1.3 million trans adults and 300,000 trans teens in the U.S. In the first 60 days of 2024, 471 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced on a national level. Violence towards trans people increases as anti-transgender bias and legislation increases. So, on my tour, I looked at several factors, including elevator access, the number of single-stall restrooms on the site, barriers to reaching the toilet, external and internal accessibility, and cleanliness. From my tour, I found that 8 bathrooms required the use of an elevator to be accessible, with 4 having an optional accessible entrance with an elevator. And of these 12 elevators, 11 had expired permits. 8 bathrooms had some type of barrier to reach the toilet, including a wall, a small entryway. 1 bathroom required a code, and based on my personal experience, many bathrooms felt unwelcoming. Essentially, all of these bathrooms have room to improve their accessibility for anyone using the bathrooms. Bathrooms are more than just a toilet. They're physically constructed and socially gendered locations where people talk, meet, inhabit, that are segregated by sex and gender. Gender bathrooms are harmful because they exclude trans and non-binary people from society. They reinforce false stereotypes that trans people are dangerous and predatory. They exacerbate discrimination, violence, and harassment. They harm mental and physical health, and they waste time. This impacts everyone, but especially trans and non-binary people, wheelchair users and disabled folks, intersex people, parents with young children, and people waiting in lines for bathrooms. Today, people claim that all gender bathrooms are a threat to women's safety and basic decency, that trans people are seen as a threat, both sexual predators and prey. And ultimately, trans people are blamed for the violence against them. So let's take a look at some of the history around the social and physical constructions of bathrooms. In the mid-1800s, there was a big science movement that pushed to claim women were inherently less intelligent and physically weaker based off of faulty premises, which ultimately encouraged women to stay in the home and were not subject to vulgar, predatory males, which ultimately reduced workforce competition for men during the industrialization period. These scientific principles informed legislation which led to sex-segregated public facilities. In 1852, the first workplace protection for white women and children were implemented, but men were not protected, so companies didn't have to make working conditions actually safe for everyone. In 1887, the first workplace toilets were separated by sex, which further fueled the need to protect reproduction and the human race because women were seen as pure and virgins. There was a big distinguishing line between masculinity and femininity, but people of color faced more segregation. From Jim Crow era segregation around the same time, separate but equal rulings codified segregation. So Black women and children were not allowed to use women's or white spaces and were always expected to use second-class accommodations, with some Black people in the South not even being provided access to public facilities. Disabled folks didn't get access to accessible restrooms until the 1990 Americans with Disability Act. So some things you can do is to avoid using all gender restrooms if you have alternative options. You can make sure that accessible entrances are actually accessible. Don't park scooters on walkways. If you're able to, avoid taking elevators, avoid using accessible stalls in multi-stall bathrooms, and advocate for desegregating bathrooms, for floor-to-ceiling stalls, for legislation that supports and encourages gender diverse and disabled people to be their wonderful selves. Ultimately, try to be compassionate and learn from your mistakes.